Okay. A little bit different today. Our invocation is going to be given by Frank Relly, who's online with us on Zoom. So Frank.
Thank you. Let us pray. Dear God, thank you for our many blessings, but we continue to ask for your help. We ask that you help us invigorate our minds and bodies so we can focus on what is most often called the golden rule of treating others as we would want them to treat us. Help us to remove the clouds that often hinder clear and wise thinking to find golden rule solutions to the issues that divide us. Help us to find the emotional strength to fight fear by challenging fake news, resisting peer pressure and destructive emotions. Please give us the strength to find honesty and clarity to use the Rotarian four-way test to find truth, fairness, goodwill, and friendship so we can all benefit from our actions. Amen.
Thank you, Frank. Welcome back, everybody. Appreciate your flexibility with us last week. We decided to cancel last week and give us one more week to kind of get past the holidays, but it's good that we can be back together. I see that we have about 27 people on Zoom, so that's great. I'm glad that we can continue to offer that option for folks that want to connect via Zoom. So appreciate all of you being online, and certainly give me feedback if the sound issues and everything are working out okay for you on Zoom today. Let's see here. So just wanted to take a moment here and thank Angel Lichty for organizing our Salvation Army bell ringing campaign. These are just a few pictures of some of our Rotarians at work there. I know I always enjoy doing that. I did a shift this year. I usually have a good experience that I can tell. So my experience this time was, as I'm standing there ringing the bell, there's really nothing else to do. So as people come out and just kind of let their carts float out there to the middle of that area, I put the carts back in the corral for them. So the one guy came in and saw me doing that, and he walked up to me, he had this pair of slippers, and he said, where do I go to do Amazon returns? I said, well, I think maybe go in and ask the service desk. I don't know that they do that here. So it's always a good experience, and I'm glad that we can be involved in that. So also over the break, we had all the bowl games. And so Kathy McConnell sent me this picture. Her husband was out in Pasadena for the Rose Bowl parade, and he took this picture of the Rotary float. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Speaking of the bowl game, I was a little frustrated there in the first half, Scott. I don't know what was happening in the first half, but we did ultimately come through in that game. And one of the things in bowl season that I like to do is look at those Heisman Trophy candidates and see how they did. So, we had C.J. Stroud there with 573 yards and 6 touchdowns, who placed last in the Heisman voting. Then we had A.J. Hutchinson. I looked at his stats. He had 4 tackles, no sacks, no forced fumbles. So just saying. This weekend is the Sharon B. Altoff Rotary Invitational, the speech and debate tournament at the high school. Next week, we'll actually have the coach here and a couple of students for our program next week. But that will be happening this week. So that's a good event. I'm looking forward to being at that event. Actually volunteered to work in the kitchen for a while. I'm not sure why I did that. I've got experience though, so I think I'll be okay. Just as a note, in case you didn't know, we've already replaced our flag, our community flag, once. Justin, how many people did it take you to change that out?
We had 10, it only took 3.
We had 10 people on board, and it took 3 people to change that out. So kudos to Justin for figuring that out. Just so you know, we're planning to take that down every 3 months or so. And the company that we bought the flags from will take them and recondition them. So we spend a little bit less money getting it reconditioned, and then hopefully the flags last a little bit longer. We own 2 of them right now, so we can just take one down and get one reconditioned. So that's good news. And your piece of history today, you know, when I look for things in history, I try to avoid all the first thing that comes up is all the plane crashes and everything that happened on this day. I try to avoid the negative stuff. So on this date in 1920, the Treaty of Versailles took effect, officially ending World War I. So that's your moment of history today. All right, so we have a few guests today. So Mike Davidson has the traveling mic. Mike, if you want to start out with Tim Monet over here at this table.
I'd like to introduce Vince Marion, who is the city's new planner.
Greg Long over here.
My guest today is Tim Fox, Customer Relations Manager for PNC Bank.
The same table with Dave Gallatin.
My daughter is my firstborn child, Amy. Amy's a retired special ed teacher.
Any other guests that we missed? I think we're good, Mike. Thank you. Also, I have a new member badge today for Garish Rajashekara. He's a new member attending his first official meeting today. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marty Starkey, who's going to introduce today's book.
First step is the worst one. Our guest today is Jim Stoner. He's originally from Russellvania, Ohio, and is an Ohio State graduate with an English degree, though his mother swears he majored in the OSU Men's Glee Club. Maybe we could get a taste of that in a little bit. Though he was raised in a rural small town farming community, Jim has always been active in theater, music, and historical research. Also, at an early age, his older brother bestowed the curse of being a lifelong Browns fan. He has spent the bulk of his professional career in a sales, marketing, and business consulting environment. Jim has spent the most of the last 10 years operating his own sales and media company and managing nonprofit and professional theater projects on Mount Vernon Players and Madcap Living History. His primary vendors are Jackson Well Services and the Town Money Saver Direct Mail Company. Since 2012, Jim and his wife have been marketing the story of Charles Follis, the first Black professional football player. With the help of many others, he has managed to have legislation passed naming the day for Charles Follis, which is February 3rd, written and staged the play The Black Cyclone 8 times, written the screenplay of the same name, and partnered with the Charles Follis Memorial Committee to build Charles a new headstone in Wooster Cemetery. He also completed the Black Cyclone Trail, a driving tour that tells a story. Jim is a past member of the Shelby Rotary Club, Mount Vernon Kiwanis Club, and Mount Vernon Exchange Club. Please welcome Jim Stoner.
Thank you, Marty. I'm really flattered to have been invited by Marty to come and speak with the Rotary Club today. Rotary does a lot of fantastic things. And I remember our initiatives in the 90s, of course, was to eradicate polio. And Marty tells me we're getting closer all the time. That's great. It was just my schedule that precluded me from continuing in Rotary Club when I changed communities. I was the Shelby Chamber of Commerce president in Shelby for 5 years. And then I worked at Ashland University, and I've been active in a number of marketing and sales environments. And honestly, when people ask me what I do or what I've done, I just say, I'm from the island of misfit toys. I've tried to make the most of whatever career I've endeavored to be a part of, and it's worked out pretty well so far. And I've been running my own sales and marketing company now for 10 years. My background includes radio, sales and advertising. I wrote a lot of copy, have done a number of performance
Hey, Ted,
affiliated
you want to come
roles,
watch Rotary?
acting,
He's
etc.
just starting right now.
Actually worked in the music business from 1990 to 1994, traveling as a concert promoter. I've done a variety of things, so I always tell young people, hey, just look for something fascinating and go for it, as long as you're improving yourself. And that's been my lesson all along the way. And I like to mention Russellvania, Ohio, because not very many people know where that is. And I brought a door prize today for anybody who can tell me without looking on their phone what county Russellvania is in. That's hilarious. I'll have to come up with another door prize question. I'm not surprised. My father was the mayor of Russellvania for 12 years. So I always try and do it a little bit of justice, give it a little love. But it was, I guess I'll start real quickly and give you the Reader's Digest condensed version of why this story became important to me. And as I've gotten older, I've learned that this story became important because of where I was from, oddly enough, which was Russellvania. As I was explaining to Marty a minute ago, Russellvania is a little tiny town of 450 people. And it's very rural. And I grew up farming and getting to know everyone in town, and in particular, the people right there in our neighborhood. And the only man of color in Russellvania was the retired barber named Tabe. And he was as I said, he was a black man who was nearly blind, and he lived across the street. And he was on our party line, if that's dating myself, I'm sure it is. But he would frequently stumble into the table and knock the phone off the hook. So Mom would say, being the youngest, Jimmy, go across the street and put the phone back on the hook for Tabe, would you? So from the time I was 6 to the time I was 12, I was investing about a half hour to 45 minutes a week visiting with old Tabe and learning a lot about life and people. And when I got to the Ohio State University, after having played football and studied theater and done musical performances, I got to the Ohio State University and was sitting having conversations with my roommates when we were living in a dormitory, the Towers, Lincoln. There were more people in my dorm than in my hometown, and more people of diverse backgrounds and different upbringings than there were people in my hometown. And through the conversations I had, even though I was from a very small town, I learned that people would expect me to be prejudiced and not be accepting of all the other people that I was meeting. But then I learned that I had attended more weddings and funerals by the time I was 18 than most of those fellas in that dormitory would attend in a lifetime. And what does that tell me about small town America? It tells me that we're reared with a feeling of extended family and getting to know people as people. And subsequently, as I embarked upon my professional career after Ohio State, I had fallen into radio sales, and then I sold for another company. And then I landed in Shelby, Ohio, and was walking through the Shelby Museum of History and came upon this photograph, which you'll see a close-up of in a moment. This book, because of the extraordinary history of football in the city of Shelby, was written by a gentleman named Fred Eichinger. Fred started working on this book in the 70s and had researched Charles Follis and every football team that had ever played in Shelby from the 1890s clear through the 1980s, when they still had not just a high school team, but they also had a semi-pro team that played in Skiles Field. And he started writing this book and researching Charles, and he finished it. And it also has a storied history in it of the Ohio League. And this photograph, which is all pre-NFL, has a picture that I stumbled upon in the museum of a man named Frank Schiffer, who had brought his Shelby Blues team to Wooster to play against the Wooster Athletic Club. Now, at the time, the Ohio League only had about 12 to 15 teams in it, and they would just beat the snot out of each other for bragging rights, because that's all there was to earn. And 50 people died playing football in Ohio from 1902 to 1906. Teddy Roosevelt, if you didn't know, threatened to ban the game. Even though he loved it for its camaraderie and its ability to build character and strength with young men and give them physical activity, he called on the athletic directors of Penn, Rutgers, Princeton, Yale, and a name that many people will recognize in the room, Pop Warner. They were all brought to the White House to discuss how to save football. Well, this photograph shows Frank Schiffer, because football was saved, so to speak, standing in 1902 with his hand on the shoulder of one of his star players when they won the championship against Canton. He's got his hand like this on the shoulder of his singular black player in the league. His name was Charles Follis, here in Wooster. And how many people in the room to this point have never heard of Charles? Pretty amazing. How many had not heard of him until the last year or so? How many of you learned about him, say, in the last 5 years? Okay, great. Well, when Charles Follis was playing for Wooster, Shelby was, of course, scoring about 130 points a season in 8 games. Their opponents would score 24. Shelby was a bunch of really rugged steel-making boys, as they built themselves, the Shelby Blues. Well, they came to Wooster, and according to the headline at the Wooster newspaper at the time, due to the outstanding play of Charles Follis, the Black Cyclone, on offense and defense, well, the Wooster Athletic Club only lost to Shelby by 8 points. They were very proud of that. Well, Frank Schiffer never wanted to play against Charles again and walked up to Charles and told him so and said, "I will pay you $10 a game if you'll come to Shelby and play for my Blues." Well, Charles was the oldest boy in the Follis family. He was the son of Kate and Henry Follis, who were former slaves and had come to Wooster to find a new home in the north. And Charles had 4 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. And Charles was sort of a fellow breadwinner and had to struggle with going to Shelby. But he decided, since he was going to earn some money, and Mr. Schiffer offered Charles a job as well. Now, understand, many communities in Ohio were called sundown towns. There's actually a list of them published on the internet, if you look them up. And in Ohio, there were cities that discouraged people of color from remaining in town after dark. And Shelby was one of the premier cities that sort of enforced that. They had signs up, and Frank still thought he could bring Charles to town and help overcome that issue. He thought he could do it through sport. Well, Frank was also really smart in that he went to Ohio Wesleyan and found a young man there who had not only grown up playing with people of color down in Perry County, Ohio, but once he got to college at Ohio Wesleyan, he continued recruiting blacks to play on the teams at Ohio Wesleyan. Football, baseball, basketball. Well, Frank recognized that when he ran across this young man when they played against him at Ohio Wesleyan. And he asked him if he wouldn't mind coming to Shelby. And he could oversee Charles and sort of usher him about town and help him smooth over the ruffled feathers, if you will, in the community. And it didn't always go easily for Charles, but after a few years, he did win them over in Shelby with his amazing play. And he was always known to get up off the ground with a smile on his face. And he was never known to get into a fight or a squabble. And to give you an idea of how rough football was, besides the death piece, does anyone know the first piece of equipment that was invented as protective gear in football? No, helmets didn't arrive large scale until about 1908. There were one or two on the team at that point, but there was one particular piece that was worn by all the linemen on the offensive side of the ball. It was a shin guard, because the defensive lineman would kick the offensive lineman in the shins so hard to make them wince, so they could reach across their shoulders and tackle the man carrying the ball. Then they invented the nose guard, which I've got some interesting pictures of that too, which became known as the blood collector, because there was just a hard piece of rubber that was crafted to sit over the nose to keep it from getting smashed completely, and they tied a string behind their head. And these are just some interesting things that I've learned about football as I've embarked upon this research. Because after I saw this photograph, and having been a football historian most of my life anyway, I was like, what is going on here? How did I not know who Charles Follis was? So I started researching it, and I was still a chamber president at that time. And I was very busy. I was raising a family. Got clear to the point of an entire life change in 2004, after having told this story frequently that I had discovered, and no one knew it. I'd always said to myself quietly, with my theater background that I had put to bed for about 20 years, I said, I'm going to write a play someday about Charles Follis. Well, finally, I moved, raised my kids, sadly went through a divorce, but got remarried. And the young lady that I remarried finally said to me, after she'd known me for 3 years, she said, Jim, you are either going to write the story about Charles Follis, the Black Cyclone, or I never want to hear his name again. I'm sure some of us can relate to that, can't we? Well, I endeavored to write it, and with the help of Kokosing Construction and some other folks in sponsoring it, I took it to Malabar Farm and staged it the first time outdoors, which was quite an adventure. And then we did it the next year again at Malabar in the barn. And then we staged it in Wooster with the help of the Wooster High School and the community players, if some of you may remember that. And we've ended up staging the play 8 times. I've had a feature done by NFL Films Presents, which got us some national attention. We also were included in a documentary that was then Time Warner Cable called Before the League. And we were the desegregation piece because of Charles playing for Shelby. Now I've saved the aha moment because I never told you the name of that young white man that played with Charles in Shelby, that went to Ohio Wesleyan. Because what ultimately happens, and why this is such a fascinating story, and we hope becomes a nationally recognized story, is when Charles, and that isn't the real Charles Follis, by the way, that's a picture of the young man that has played Charles for me a number of times. His name is Damian Buford, but we use him as a marketing tool. I've got about 6 of those that I stage around the region when I'm staging the play. But the young white man and Charles were good friends. Charles, in 1906, decided he was done with football due to injury and decided to go join the Negro Leagues of the Baseball Association. His white friend had also had it with football and had finished with college, so he went off to play Major League Baseball. Charles Follis died sadly and suddenly in 1910 of pneumonia while playing baseball for the Cuban Giants. They were sort of the Harlem Globetrotters of the Negro Leagues. They would travel around and face all comers and beat the socks off of them. Well, Charles, besides having played for the Wooster college baseball team, became renowned as a fine catcher. And he could throw out base stealers at second base pretty easily. And he was a slugger. But when Charles passed away, he almost was lost to history. And his white friend never forgot him and continued with his career. And in 1947, decided, these white guys aren't cutting it right now. As he owned the Brooklyn Dodgers. He said, the batting averages are down. Nobody's stealing any bases. Nobody's coming to see him play anymore. There's just no excitement. But look what they're doing in the Negro Leagues. They're killing it. It's time we integrated baseball, and I finally found somebody that reminds me of my old friend Charles Follis. Here, Lou, go sign Jackie Robinson. And that's how Jackie Robinson became the first Black professional baseball player. But no one knew, no one could put a finger on who the first Black professional football player was until an article was written in the 70s by some people that had done extensive research and found the contract that Charles Follis had signed with Frank Schiffer. And that's the story. And then the rest of the story is that, of course, God tapped me on the shoulder and said, Jim, you're going to tell this story of Charles Follis, and it's not going to go away. He didn't tell me that part. It just keeps coming, and waves roll in, and we do something else. We've staged the play, as I said a number of times. We've written the screenplay. We've been working at it for 7 years. We have it honed. We've had some fine directors in the business tell us that, dare I use the word Oscar-worthy, that they love the screenplay. Paul Thomas Anderson has said as much, if you know who that is. We're really excited about making the film. We're largely funded. We have marketing money in place. We have a performance bond, if some of you in the room know what that is. We're going to make the movie. And at present, we're scheduled to make it in 2022. And my intentions are, if I can continue to have success in the region and with state officials, et cetera, is that we do it in Worcester. And that's what I'm personally excited about as I make my home in Mount Vernon. And in the meantime, we also had legislation passed, thanks to Representative Wiggin and Mark Romanchuk. They drafted legislation, and I had to testify in front of Congress a couple of times, and we got it passed as House Bill 229. And February 3rd is Charles Follis Day in the state of Ohio. And so when February rolls around, if we get decent weather, but I doubt if it will happen that soon. But by spring, we hope to be dedicating what I consider to be one of the great achievements of our process of celebrating Charles Follis to date has been the Black Cyclone Trail. And the Black Cyclone Trail is now what I know Marty and her colleagues in Richland County are considering to be a nice little piece of tourist attraction generator, as it's a trail that takes people on a journey from Worcester, where Charles is from, of course, and lived most of his life. It takes people from Worcester to Shelby. And the signs are actually, I pulled it up. How do I bring them up? Is it? Okay.
That's just mine.
Okay.
It wasn't.
At any rate, the first sign on the trail, which you have a card in front of you that takes you on a journey, But if you drive around Wooster, you're going to find a number of trail signs. There are 8 in town. How many of you have noticed them or seen them about? Well, I hope you do now going forward if you haven't yet. They're about 2 feet tall by 4 feet wide, 3 feet wide. And they explain the significance of that site. Also, when you click on the QR code, which is on the signs and on the card, a living history character will pop up and talk you through the importance of that site. And it all started because of my dear friend that I came to know through the Charles Follis Project, David Breyer. And he and I got to know each other because Mike Franks was asked to seek out Charles Follis's headstone in the cemetery here in Worcester. He did so, and he and David were both ashamed of the condition of the Charles Follis headstone, knowing he was the first Black professional football player in America. So Mike said, let's build him a new headstone. Well, then David said, I'm not just going to build him a headstone. What else can we do? And they roped me in. And he said, Jim, we want to build this headstone up, and we think you should be involved since you're Mr. Charles Follis. You're the godfather of the Black Cyclone Project, as he called me. He said, let's do something else. I said, how about a trail? So I wanted to thank everybody in this room that contributed and discussed it and helped fund the Black Cyclone Trail, as it's also going to fund the Charles Follis Scholarship, and it's now spawned a Charles Follis Scholarship in Shelby, Ohio, which isn't any more diverse today than it was 120 years ago, which is really unique. We're going to award a scholarship for anybody that overcomes a challenge. And thanks to David and Mike and my committee, which I could list person after person after person that really stepped forward in Worcester to make this happen. And I hope continues to line up, because I'm going to need more help going forward as we finish securing locations, places to stay, properties to use. I actually have about 50 photographs in my computer of sites that are approved locations once we pull the trigger. I welcome lots of questions. If you have them, or if you just want to approach me afterward, you can find me via my website that's on the back of this rack card. My official website is getting redeveloped right now, thanks to the support of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, both here and in Richland County. And Marty's been a great resource in helping me seek out resources and directions in making this all happen. And if you have some time and want to learn more about the film project, some of you were assembled a few weeks ago, a couple of months actually now, to explore the Black Cyclone film, the Black Cyclone movie website. And it walks people through the story of Charles Follis. It's on the screen now. And then why we need to tell the movie. It goes through the cinematic style. These are some movies that we're going to borrow from it stylistically, which you may remember. And then we go into the photographs of people that we've talked to about the film. We can't afford everybody, but when we send the screenplay to people, we want them to see people in these roles, so that as they're reading it, they see them. And you'll recognize some of these folks. Some are available, some are not. Our schedule is going to get pretty tight as we intend to film April, May through the summer and get into post-production in the fall with a projected opening date for the movie right around Super Bowl time or Charles Follis Day. Then Branch Rickey. These are some of my favorites. Lloyd Kaufman is a fictitious person that I've made up, who is the worst racist you'll ever see in your life. And Woody Harrelson would be fantastic at that. Curtis Follis, Charles's younger brother who died playing football. By the way, I want to thank the college, as Wayne's leaving too. The College of Worcester's been a tremendous asset. They're host to a couple of the signs, and they've been helping as well as other folks in town. The library, I have to mention. I've been really received warmly with this project, and I'm so glad, because it could have been a lot worse, as I've faced on other projects. Here are some other folks that you may recognize, but this is all online, so if you want to look at it or read it, please do so. Kevin Costner, we're looking at as a cameo. One of our producers knows Kevin, and we're hoping that he can come in and do a cameo as Pop Warner. Pop Warner, of course, is the football innovator. And some directing possibilities. Some of you will recognize Sean Astin. And there's a story breakdown on that site too. But are there any questions for me, as I know we're wrapping up and I don't want to keep you long? I hope, Marty, I've educated people on the trail and told them more about Jim Stoner than they probably ever cared to know.
Any questions for Jim? I can bring the microphone.
Also, if you belong to a company that's been in town 100 years, please approach me or seek me out, because we want to talk with you about opportunities to showcase your business in the film. That's a big part of making a movie. So, gosh, no questions? I've gotten really good. Yes.
You did a good job. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. The rat cards, please feel free to take those with you. Spread the word. Visit the trail. I also wanted to give a commercial to a friend of mine. At the Blue Barn Winery, Brett Lasky. He and I became fast friends when I showed up at his place about 6 years ago, and he learned I was a Frank Sinatra performer, and he wanted me to do a show for him. So I did that for 5 years running at Christmas time. Some of you in the room are probably saying, I knew I'd seen that, guys. But Brett has stepped up. I intend to do a lot of the shooting for the film on his property. And he stepped up and produced the Black Cyclone wine. It's a red blend. It's really good. It's available for purchase from Brett when he's open. He also made a Black Cyclone beer. And I'm trying to think of a really good trivia question to give away my bottle on now. I hate to reduce to the old standby. Is there a birthday in the room this month? Is there a birthday in January? Well, if I just give you the bottle, people will think I paid you for the compliment. But well, he admitted his birthday's in March. I'm just going to give him the wine. Everybody else is way too bashful. Seriously, no questions? The other prop that I brought, just for fun, this was the first football we made to resemble the football from the period. And it's just kind of fun. When you see footballs that are from that period now, most of them aren't filled with air anymore. There's a little piece of trivia for you. Most of them are filled with packing peanuts because they won't hold air. This one quit holding air the first show we did, and the guys flattened it. So I stuffed it full of rags. but it works. And I've got this book, which is fascinating. I'll show you some pictures, or please just come up and share with me any thoughts or ideas. I'm also do I have 1 minute yet? The Wayne County Fairgrounds has a lot of sites that I love. Something to consider and something that I need help finding is an older looking farmhouse, which also has, it's not terribly run down, but looks like it's still lived in. But it has to have lots of parking. This is the trick. And most everything around it needs to look like it could have been here 100 years ago. But if you think of it, you know how to find me. Marty knows how to find me. And I very much appreciate this opportunity. Thank you very much. I always end everything with what Lucille Wood said at the dedication of Follis Field. Run, Charles, run for the ages. His sister used to stand up on the sidelines and yell that to Charles when he would break for a long game. Just a little piece of trivia. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you coming, particularly on short notice. I know we didn't give you a lot of notice, but I can't think of a better program for us to hear at this time. And what a great story for Wooster and for professional football. I know I first learned probably Charles Follis when they named the field at the high school, Charles Follis Field. I'd say before that, I probably wasn't sure I knew the story, but what a great story it is. So thank you for coming today. In recognition of your visit with us today, we have this rendition of a rotary wheel with a 4-way test on the back, and these are made locally by the village network.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks to Marty for helping us out, getting Jim here on short notice. We appreciate that. So next week, we will have, as I mentioned earlier, the speech and debate team coach here, Holly Custer, and a couple of students who are going to be giving us some speeches next week. So we look forward to that, and have a good week, Rotarians. We stand adjourned.